Hello, everyone, and welcome to another spoiled episode. Before I get any further, I really just want to highly recommend watching The Brutalist, which is what this video will be about. Of course, this is Spoiled, a series where I spoil a film, but also use that to discuss important themes mentioned throughout the film. So please, if you haven't watched this film yet, I know that it is definitely a commitment. Please allow yourself to watch it before watching this video. But if you're like me, I'm also somebody who sometimes likes to be spoiled. So yeah, I get it. Watch this video. But again, highly recommend to watch it for yourself. Before I get into anything about the film, let me tell you a little bit about my experience watching the film because it was very interesting. This is one of the first times I have ever watched a film how the filmmaker intended it to be viewed. I saw it at the Village East Angelica, which offered a 70 millimeter viewing at their large opera theater. So this is just a video of what it looked like during the intermission. Super cool. We had that huge chandelier. Of course, it was turned off during the actual film. But yeah, it was just a beautiful environment to be in while watching a film about architecture because it is also a historical fixture in New York City, for those who don't know. And also, I don't really know all that well, but this is part of a Moorish style of build. Anyway, it's very clear that there's architecture significance, and that felt really important while watching that film. And also, in that area of East Village, New York City, there are so many architectural history there, so it's really interesting just to walk out of that theater and just walk down 2nd Avenue and see all of these different buildings that represent different time periods in New York City. I also want to say that they surprised us, although I do think we deserve that surprise because the tickets to watch this film were $27, okay? So I'm going to be honest, I'm a film buff, as I've mentioned before, but it was $27. It was not cheap, but a surprise. At the end of the film, they gave us a poster and a brochure that's just about the Doylestown Community Center and Laszlo Toth's life, and a postcard. I thought it was really cool. It didn't reveal much about the plot. It just kind of re-emphasized this idea that Doylestown is actually the community center is supposed to represent Laszlo's experience during the Holocaust in the concentration camps. But really great presentation. Have no idea what I'm going to do with the poster. But thank you for the surprise that I did not expect to get. So now let's get into the actual outline of this film. All right. As you probably already know, as this is one of the most talked about aspects of the film, this film is 3 hours and 35 minutes. There is a 15-minute intermission offered. At my theater, they actually were kind. They didn't only give us 15 minutes because they didn't have enough bathroom stalls. Okay? But yeah, they didn't only give us 15 minutes, but yeah, they do have that, and when this is available on digital, it'll be interesting to see how people decide to watch this, if they give themselves an intermission, or if they just stop the film whenever they want to and go to the bathroom. Regardless, I actually liked 3 hours and 35 minutes. It didn't feel like the film was that long. The pacing was really great, and I think a part of the reason why the film didn't feel that long is that I could tell also along with my fellow moviegoers, felt very connected to the characters. So we just wanted to see what was going to happen to our man. So we were in it for the long haul, and I have a very controversial opinion about the length of this film, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so the director is Brady Colbert, and I was really surprised. This is only his 3rd feature film. In his 2nd feature film, he also got Natalie Portman to be in it, but yeah, he's relatively young at 36 years old to make this big of an epic. He actually started as a child actor, and then he moved into directing and film writing. Actually found a picture of him when he starred in this film called 13, and then you see the pictures that they use of him now. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that, look, I'm glad that we can be honest about aging. But I feel like oftentimes when people talk about aging, they talk about women, but he's a very good example of how, yeah, you're not going to look the same way you looked like when you were 12 or 13. But anyway, I just thought that was really interesting because if somebody showed me these 2 photos, I would not have known that they were the same person. But yes, he started as a child actor, moved into directing. He's clearly extremely ambitious, and I love that. I love an ambitious person who's just willing to go for it because it requires a lot of work and effort, and I think he's willing to put in that work, and he clearly did, because he was able to get a phenomenal cast who saw his talents in his prior films and as well in the script that they likely provided him. So the cast includes Adrian Brody, Guy Pearce, Felicity Jones, Alessandro Nivola. Now I'm going to say something. Every single person that appeared on this screen for this film was amazing. Absolutely drop amazing, a masterclass in acting. So I'm not going to point that out until a little later because I feel like it's not beyond the point. But the people who I really feel deserve some nominations are all these four people listed here: Adrian Brody, Guy Pearce, Felicity Jones, and Alessandra Nivola. They just all did such a great job. I've never seen characters really like that. Actually I have, but I've never felt like, oh my god, I really feel like these characters are real. Even though I've seen all of these four actors in different work, they were completely immersed in what they did. Loved it. I'm also going to talk about the score. Daniel Bloomberg did his big thing. Even if you don't end up watching this film, I highly recommend listening to the score. It's available on Spotify, at least for me, and it's great. It's really, really fantastic. This is how you write a score that emotionally leads you to certain things, but at the same time provides an atmosphere. And it really, I think the score is half the reason why this film is described as an epic by many reviewers, because yeah, that's what it is. It really feels, with the crescendos, so big and so massive, even if the story at its core is actually quite mundane. And then the ideal audience is a biopic lover who wonders if a fictional character can contain the same gravitas as a biopic subject. So now I'm going to go into some film background stuff. Not too much. This is a picture of a Brutalist building. Before I get into my explanation of brutalism, I do want to say that I understand that Bauhaus educated architects, which is what Laszlo Toth is not necessarily under the umbrella of brutalism, but I do feel like the title brutalism does tie into this. So let's get into the actual Laszlo Toth. I was not the only one in my theater, by the way, who during the intermission was fervently Googling Laszlo Toth like he was a real person, which just speaks to the strength of the film, that we all thought this person has to be real with how tangible so many of the plot points felt, but he's not real. But the real Laszlo Toth is a very fascinating person. He is a Hungarian-born geologist who vandalized Michelangelo's Pieta statue in 1972, where he declared himself as Jesus Christ, risen from the dead. So that is the character that actually has the name Laszlo Toth. I feel like it is not a coincidence, like at all, that this is the name of our protagonist here. I can't really get the connection. Maybe I don't see the Laszlo Toth in the film as a Jesus-like character, but I could see him as somebody who's willing to sort of destroy the beauties of Renaissance, or that the Michelangelo is not Renaissance, but during ancient times or the past times, and trying to reestablish himself as the new person around town. I also think brutalism is a part of this. Brutalism is a very controversial architectural style, but I think it also is being referenced here in the film. The style of architecture became popular in the 1950s, but died off around the 1980s. The Smithsons, who are important for the New Brutalist movement, said that brutalism prioritizes reverence for materials, a realization of the affinity which can be established between a building and man. And this idea of the relationship between building and man is at the core of the film The Brutalist. So let's get into what this film is about and get into the spoil territory. This film is about the brutalization of the American dream, and also borrows from the brutalist kind of architecture movement to sort of analyze the aspects that happen. So again, before I get really into the specifics of plot points, going to reiterate, I think you should watch this film yourself. Even if you don't feel like shuckling and jiving like I did for $27 at the Angelica, go ahead and wait until it gets on streaming and watch it yourself. It is a really wonderful and enjoyable experience. We begin the film with the scene of a European woman being interrogated in a room. She's wearing clothes that looks like the clothing that concentration camp prisoners during the Holocaust War. She's asked to affirm that the woman outside is truly related to her. We then come to a scene on a boat where we're introduced to our protagonist, Laszlo Toth. He oscillates between speaking Hungarian and English, and until we get to the deck, we recognize that we're on a boat, and we see a chaotic shot of the Statue of Liberty, which is upside down. This is our hint that the story is about to be an inversion of the American dream. We then spend a brief time in New York where Laszlo has some fun time with his boat friend who he took the trip from Europe with. He visits a brothel with his friend, but is unable to remain erect, presumably because he's trying to remain loyal to his wife, Ursabet. But keep this film in mind because it'll be relevant in a later scene. Throughout part one of the film, we hear voiceovers of letters from Ursabet, Laszlo's wife, who became estranged as a result of the Holocaust. As many people know, men and women were put in separate camps, so that makes sense. And it's kind of implied that Laszlo was in Germany during while the Holocaust was happening, and Ursabet and the niece was still in Hungary. So that's why he was captured by the Westerners and he was able to be freed by the Westerners, but the Soviets were the ones who took over Hungary, and that's where Ursabet and Sofia, the niece, are found. He's trying to bring both his wife and niece over, but the niece is unable to talk as a result of the traumatizations of the war. Laszlo takes a bus to Philadelphia, and the film uses documentary-style voiceovers to describe Philadelphia's importance to American history. So voiceovers are very prominent throughout this film. Upon Laszlo's arrival to Philadelphia, he's greeted by his cousin Attila, who is played by Alessandra Nivola. Attila informs Laszlo that he has received communication from Ursabet and confirms that Ursabet and Zofia are alive. Attila seems genuinely excited to see Laszlo and have him around. Attila introduces Laszlo to his Catholic wife, and they have a conversation about how Attila has assimilated to American culture. Attila owns a furniture store with his wife and gives Laszlo a storage room in that furniture store. Laszlo does his best to earn his keep, including creating his own furniture, which Attila's wife believes is unsellable. Despite the kindness from Attila and his wife, Laszlo still needs to visit a soup kitchen where he meets a new friend, Gordon, a black man who has a young kid to care for. One day, Attila receives an emergency commission that requires Laszlo and Attila to go to Doylestown to provide an estimate. We meet Harry Van Buren, played by Joe Alwyn, who is trying to revamp his father's library as a surprise gift. Laszlo is able to move Harry to a $2,000 estimate from what Attila says he was going to accept a $450 commission, which makes, of course, Attila very excited. And that night, Attila celebrates with Laszlo and his wife. There's this tense scene where Attila forces Laszlo and his wife to dance. After Attila falls asleep, his wife confronts Laszlo and covertly suggests that he finds another job and move out of the furniture storage room. Laszlo gets her message and informs her that he will be on his way soon. Laszlo begins to rush work in order to revamp the Van Buren library and brings Gordon along with him. Laszlo brings an innovative idea for the bookshelves that protects the books from sunlight damage without requiring the blocking of light from the ceiling to floor-to-ceiling windows. However, Harrison Van Buren, the father, played by Guy Pearce, arrives early with his mother, who are shocked to see Gordon, a black man, outside. They demand an explanation for the presence of Attila and Laszlo in the library. They are ejected from the Van Buren home, and the following morning, Attila informs Laszlo that they lost the commission. Attila wholly blames Laszlo for the lack of any restitution for the work done, and then also says that Laszlo came onto his wife, which is clearly not true. Laszlo is immediately kicked out of the storage room and moves into a Catholic homeless shelter where Gordon and his son also live. We get clear evidence of a heroin addiction at this point, which Laszlo was introduced to after a brutal nose accident that he got during the war. And also to mention that the wife, one of the first things he mentions to Laszlo is says, "Hey, we could get that nose fixed here in America." And while I think that Laszlo talks about it as if it's about the brokenness of the nose, which actually Adrian Brody, the actor, has a really interesting story about that, I think that the wife is more so talking about how the nose is very prominent and very clearly indicative of his Jewish heritage. So, Gordon also participates in this drug use, and we're never told where his son, William, is during this time. I just want to say, I had a lot of questions about, where is William? We're introduced to Gordon with his son, and then we just hardly ever see the son until later on into the film. And I just get this strong feeling like William was very neglected. Anyway, Laszlo and Gordon have found work at something that I can't identify. I wish I knew the name of the job. They're shoveling things. They have to climb things high. It's very dangerous. But during a break, Harrison Van Buren asks Laszlo to lunch. He just shows up there. And during lunch, Harrison reveals that he researched Laszlo's past as an esteemed architect in Hungary. Harrison is grateful because the redesigned library received a lot of attention from architecture magazines, and then Harrison invites Laszlo to a Sunday dinner, which is more like a gala. Harrison is also thankful for the intellectually stimulating conversation. That line really received a huge laughter in the theater. There's this jazz scene, but I think it's really just there to emphasize that Laszlo is still on that smackety smack, or heroin for those who don't know. Laszlo is a mess when he's picked up by Harrison's drive-in and taken to the Van Buren home in Doylestown, where there's an extravagant dinner being hosted. Laszlo meets Harrison lawyers, who are also Jewish people, but they've converted, but are very sympathetic and eager to help Laszlo reunite with his wife. And again, that moment really stood out to me. I'm from actually Caribbean and Jewish people have a weird history with each other. Okay, I'm Haitian descent, but I know a lot of Jewish people. So I remember hearing a story from one woman who said my grandparents were actually Jewish, but they never told me, and so I'm rediscovering my Judaism. Anyway, it's so sad to think about how a lot of people during that period, the early 20th century, a lot of Jewish people were just like, bro, you ain't gonna see that Jewish star or the Star of David on my neck, that's for sure. And unfortunately, a lot of them had to hide their heritage in order to evade discrimination, and then for the European Jewish people, evade basically a genocide. Or not a genocide, a flat-out genocide. All right. So Harrison Van Buren surprises Laszlo with a boom project to build a community center to commemorate his mother. Harrison also gives Laszlo housing as a part of compensation for his work. Laszlo is conflicted about the commission's explicit desire to be Christian-based, despite the center's intent to serve the community, which we kind of have already hints that there are Jewish members of the community, although it's clear that they make themselves quiet and less known. I just want to say we get an intermission around this part. And I thought this whole entire time that Felicity Jones was actually going to turn out to be some new woman in Laszlo's life. But that's not the case, because in part 2, we see Felicity Jones play Ursabet, who arrives in Philadelphia on a train with their niece, Zosfia. This is the first time Laszlo and the audience learns that Ursabet is now unable to walk due to osteoporosis caused by famine, which sounds horrendous. Bro, osteoporosis from famine? Bro, I sometimes I think about the Holocaust. I'm like, bro, these people need to be slapped just one more time. Anyway, we see a hesitant excitement from Laszlo that is very different from the excitement he showed for Attila, who seems cautious in greeting his wife and niece. I interpret this as actually frustration, because Laszlo understands that his heroin addiction will be much harder to hide with Ursabet and Zosfia in his personal space. He has been alone for 5 years and will now have to readjust to being a part of a family unit again. Ursabet is eager to have a sexual relationship with Laszlo because it seems as though, again, my interpretation, that she wants to have this quick fix to reestablish their relationship as they have been estranged for the past 5 years. At dinner, where Ursabet meets Van Buren, we learn that Ursabet is a Oxford-educated journalist. And also, to give a point, she likes to be called Elizabeth, but because Laszlo kind of got upset about them trying to call Zosfia Sophia, I'm just going to call Ursabet, even though I'm probably pronouncing it horribly wrong. Later, we see Harrison offer Ursabet a connection to get a job in journalism in New York City. Meanwhile, Laszlo has a bunch of conflicts with people on the work site where they are trying to cut costs that compromise his original vision. However, he's willing to give up a portion of his payment in order to preserve his original vision. Okay, there's this visually beautiful scene where we see a train explode, and that contains material for the community center. Because of the questionable means of transportation and the potential liabilities from the injuries caused by the accident, the construction for the community center is halted. As a result, Laszlo and Ursabet move to New York, where Ursabet works as a journalist, but for a women's magazine. So it's clear that she kind of sees this beneath her, but she still is willing to do it for money. Zosfia has recovered and regained an ability to speak. She's now older, married, and pregnant. She informs her aunt and uncle with her husband that they're going to take Aliyah, which is the immigration of Jewish people, to Israel. Ursabet and Laszlo are clearly upset, especially at the insinuation that there are bad Jewish people for staying in America. One day, a man tells Laszlo that the Doylestown Community Center construction is resuming. Laszlo continues with the construction, which includes taking a trip to Italy to see the marble that will also be used for the building. However, Harrison uses a moment when Laszlo is drunk and also high to deride Jewish people, blame them for their genocide, and then literally sexually assault Laszlo. This was a really shocking moment in the film. People were kind of, reacting prior to this moment, but let me tell you, sexual assault ruins the mood, and I don't say that to be dismissive. I'm just saying that there was a palpable change in energy in our theater after that assault. Back in Doylestown, Laszlo begins to spiral, likely due to the trauma of the assault, and which leads to a worksite freak out where he fires a worker for playing and then tells Gordon he never wants to see him again, which I think would have been more. It hit mainly because this film, by this time we're at the third hour of the film. But I wish we kind of got a little bit more with Gordon. Although something I didn't talk about is that there is a scene where Ursabet meets Gordon, and we learn that actually William, the son, stayed with his aunt in Augusta, and then after Gordon was released from duty as a military officer, he was sent to Europe during World War II. He comes back and takes William, but it kind of seems like William's like, yeah, you should have kept me over there because y'all were doing heroin in jazz clubs and living chaotic lives and couldn't even afford food. So anyway, that's just an anecdote I have about Gordon, which I'll talk a little bit more about him later. Anyway, that night, Ursabet has an extreme pain episode, which we had seen prior to this, and she doesn't have a sufficient prescription pain reliever to help her. So Laszlo, of course, gives her some of the heroin, which he also takes himself. They have this really beautiful love-making scene, and I very emphasize love-making, not sexist love-making. It's very beautiful. But she then has a very bad reaction to the heroin, and they have to go to the hospital, and that's where we learn that during their heroin high, Laszlo had revealed to Ursabet that Harrison had assaulted him. Then Ursabet does her big one. We learn that she's able to walk with the help of a walker now, and she interrupts a dinner with Harrison, who he's having dinner, it seems like, with business people and his children and their fiancés, and she confronts him about the rape, and he's just irate and what have you. Harry seems, the son, seems the most irate, and he actually violently takes Ursabet out of that room, and then we see that Harrison is missing, and we spend several minutes searching for Harrison in the mansion and the construction site of the community center. It's never confirmed what happens to Harrison, but it's implied that he was never found. Then we get to the epilogue. The film jumps to 1980 Venice Biennial, and we see that there's an event commemorating Laszlo's career. An older Zosfia, who's played by another actor, which I was kind of confused by. She's played by Ariane Labed, who is a very accomplished French actress and also the wife of Yorgos Lanthimos. And she gives a speech about Laszlo's career. And we end the film with this line: "No matter what others try and sell you, it is the destination, not the journey." Okay, so as you can kind of tell, I love this film, and my very, 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 very controversial opinion is that I actually wish this film were longer. Yeah, that's right. Boo, boo her. Yes, boo me. Because the reason I think that this film should have been longer is because I've already invested 3 hours and 35 minutes. I believe I deserve to know exactly what happened to Harrison Van Buren. Even if they didn't say explicitly, there should have been some form of, tell me what happened to Harrison Van Buren, and then I deserve to figure out how Laszlo and Ursabet got out of the Van Buren sphere of influence. It's clear in the epilogue where we see all these buildings that he builds during the 60s and even into the 70s that he's clearly been able to build a reputation for himself that allows him to get commissions from people outside of the Van Burens, but I just want to know how he did that. And we also learned that the Van Buren, the Doylestown Community Center, which was the Van Buren Commission, was eventually completed, but clearly several decades after the incident where Ursabet confronts Harrison. Okay. I also want to speak to how much I love the characters because, like I said, I thought that they were real. I was like, well, I'm going to take a road trip around America and see all the Laszlo Toth construction buildings. That just speaks to the strength of the writing and the actors, so I just want to give them a shout out. To make fictional characters feel real is really what film is all about, regardless of if you're in a sci-fi, regardless of if we're in a cartoon. That's what great media does, what great film does. And I want to say they really did their big thing here. And a shout out to Guy Pearce, who I really do believe deserves all the awards. I hadn't seen him in a while, quite frankly, in a film. And yeah, he definitely deserves a lot of praise for his portrayal in this film, because I think it's very easy for a Harrison Van Buren like character to end up looking like a caricature because of how boisterous and how demanding and dominating he is. But he manages to make Harrison Van Buren feel really real and tangible and scary. And I think that's what makes this film very intriguing. So I want to briefly talk about Zionism. I'm about to get into that danger territory, but I'm going to talk about it because the film does briefly touch on it. I think the film really just is trying to ask a question, a very leading question, but it's trying to ask a question without explicitly providing any opinion about Zionism. I think the question is, if people are subject to deep discrimination like the Jewish people are, which led to genocide in Europe and clearly a lot of crime actually here in America, people don't know KKK was also coming for the Jewish people as well. Don't they deserve a country of their own? To an extent, I feel like the sentiment makes an analysis difficult because this film is technically about the American dream, and I think that's also what the film writers had difficulty with. If we're talking about the American dream, how do we bring Israel into that? Like, and I understand that they're talking about the bastardization of the American dream, this idea that people are here in America, and technically, you know, Laszlo and even Ursabet are kind of able to do what they want to do, but there still is this calling to maybe go to another country, because at least in another country, and at the time in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s, you know, Israel was still a new country, and so it was not as established as it is today. So people were kind of like, oh, I don't know if I want to do all that. But the discrimination felt so heavy, this idea that people don't really want them in America, they don't want them in America or Europe either, then they should go to Israel, was something that was really felt. I think, quite frankly, the film had no idea what it wanted to say about Zionism, only that it sympathizes with the thought of an own country for Jewish people. It's heavily inferred that Laszlo and Ursabet stay in U.S., but again, I wish the film was longer. We never really get an explanation of that. Do they visit Zosfia in Israel? How do they feel about it? Do they ever take extended vacations in Israel? Like, I grew up in a place with a lot of Jewish people. There are a lot of Israelis that literally live between Israel and America, or quite frankly, there are a lot of Americans who live between America and Israel. So did they take that route? Again, never given a clear explanation of what they feel about or what happened to their relationship to Israel. I also want to shout out in that same vein, how discrimination is depicted. One of the most insidious aspects of discrimination is how there's always plausible deniability for discriminators. And people always expect, like, you know, when black people talk about discrimination, they expect the KKK member to try to light up their lawn and expect that to be caught in 4K. But discrimination looks like what it looks like in this film. It's about a wife. The first thing she recognizes about you is your nose and telling you that she could fix your nose. It's about, people saying a wild thing about, quote unquote, your people, and, you know, people will say, oh, it's just a political conversation. Nah. You're trying to say something about me and my people, and all these different moments that were clear evidence of discrimination and people just not wanting them there and seeing them as inferior. And it's interesting because let's say Laszlo was one of those guys, and this is also an explanation about why discrimination isn't talked about a lot. If Laszlo decided to one day talk to someone about every single discriminatory moment he went through, a lot of quote-unquote middle ground middle ground people would say Laszlo's exaggerating and likely misunderstanding a situation. That's what discrimination looks like. It's kind of like gaslighting. It's a consistent gaslighting where you know somebody's trying to say something nasty about your race, your religion, your ethnicity, and I'm Haitian American, so trust and believe. Since I was a child, I've heard really nasty stuff, and you're meant to people are always just telling you, bro, let it go. Just let it go. And you do have to let it go in order for life to go on. But it kind of leads to this sort of normalization, essentially, of discrimination. It's a normalization of this subtle abuse that really does mentally fuck with you over a long period of time. So anyway, the one moment that really stands out to me, and I kind of like, I don't know why, I really love this moment, was when the lawyer shyly reveals that he and his wife are Jewish, but they're clearly trying to move in this Van Buren world incognito. because they're kind of like whispering at the dinner table. Also, if you watch a film, did you sometimes have issue understanding what people were saying at time? I just want to ask, because I don't want to look like an idiot, but at times I did. I felt like there was a little muffling going on. But anyway, when we see the lawyer and the wife at the synagogue, like that moment just really hit me so heavily, because it made me realize like all these Jewish people, especially in the aftermath of World War II, but even in the midst of it here in America, a lot of them hid their identities to evade discrimination or to evade anybody feeling like they'd have too much empathy and sympathy for what was happening in Europe that would distract them from American ideals. So finding that these people who had essentially converted to Catholicism came back to Judaism is really beautiful, because the reality is that there's a lot of people in the world today who are actually of Jewish descent and they have no idea, because their predecessors knew and understood that in order for there to ever be progeny, unfortunately some of them had to go into hiding. And I do know that some people did eventually reclaim their Judaism, but some people unfortunately never did. So yeah, that's a really sad story about Judaism, that genuinely they really tried to wipe it out, and it almost was wiped out. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the assault, which is probably the most controversial moments of the film. I think that, I'll be honest to you, I don't know how I feel about that scene, but I did find it believable. I felt like it felt along with the scene, because I think Harrison clearly has this desire to be an intellectual and a genius like Laszlo, and he understands that he's not that. He's a brute American corporatist. And that's a lot of American industrialists during that time period. They were not known for being smart. They didn't match up to the European sort of intellectualism. And so I think that this was Harrison Van Buren trying to essentially consume every single part of Laszlo. I also think another part is this idea that Harrison Van Buren is technically new money. We understand that he kind of grew up in a destitute situation. I read this book called Richistan, which is about American old money versus new money, and how new money was constantly throughout the era, through the Gilded Age, through the earliest 20th century, into the mid 20th century, and even to this day with Trump and his relationship with old money, how they are constantly trying to immerse themselves into old money territory. And that also meant sort of acquiring this Europeanism. And you could argue that by virtue of Laszlo Toth being, yes, a European, a highly educated, a highly intelligent European, that this was Harrison Van Buren's entry into the old kind of money realm. But there is also this weirdness to it because he is Jewish. And so what if that plays a role in how old money perceives Harrison Van Buren's new money and attempt to enter into that new money scene? So that's just an idea there. Another idea I had is how I feel like Attila kind of very much he did not see his wife as a person. Wow, my words are evading me. But I felt like there was a little bit of objectification of his wife with the forcing of the dancing. But that also played a role, I believe, in her anti-Semitism towards Laszlo. And maybe I had this idea that maybe when Laszlo was there, she was forced to play a more sort of ceremonial woman role and be more objectified by Attila, and that might have played a role as to why she hated Laszlo. But anyway, she was still a racist. So putting that out there, she's a racist, and she was not a good person. But I thought that that was also a theme that could have been there. And shout out to Alessandro Nivola, who played Attila, so wonderful. So I want to see him in everything now. He was just really, really great. The dynamics also between all of these characters and all of the actors was really A1. And again, shout out to Brady Colbert for bringing everybody together, and he really did a phenomenal job in trying to communicate the dynamics between these individuals, both through the script and through like these unspoken moments that the actors just did a phenomenal job at doing. There's this like actor masterclass in this film that I know all aspiring actors are going to use for auditions moving forward, where during that dinner scene, the initial dinner scene, where Laszlo and Harrison are together, we see that Harrison explains his relationship to his mother's parents who disowned her for having Harrison out of wedlock. And then we also see Laszlo describe why he does architecture. And I feel like those scenes were just extremely well written. And I think scenes where it kind of becomes a monologue or soliloquy can easily fall into being very overdone and dramatic. But there was just a subtleness and a realness about the conversation that they were having that felt really there. And if an actor is able to execute this without feeling like they're performing some Hamlet soliloquy, I think that really shows how they might be built for the film industry. So anyway, just thought that. All right, and so my final point in this very long video is Gordon. Okay, Gordon is the black man in this film. I clocked his accent immediately. Bro did not perfect his American accent before doing this show. And I actually thought that they were going to bring up something like, oh, he's from the Caribbean. And again, this is me self-inserting because I'm of Haitian American descent. So I immediately caught that the accent was a little French. I'm like, oh my God, bro. I know dude is my Haitian. Like, he's a francophone. But turns out anyway, I found out that the actor Isaac de Becole is basically a very well-renowned French actor. I wish that they had gotten more into, like, maybe he was from New Orleans or Creole descent. They did not give any explanation why he had that accent that he did, and yet here we are. So I wish they kind of excused his accent, like, oh yeah, he's from New Orleans and he's one of those Creoles that actually still speaks their version of Creole. The Creole in New Orleans is very different from the Creole in Haiti, but it's still there. But even then, because the Creole people in New Orleans, they speak English, they have a Louisiana accent still. So anyway, that was just me. I was very much like sitting there waiting for an explanation of Gordon's accent, but they never gave it. Finally, this is just a film I highly recommend watching. It was a really great film. Yes, I have that controversial opinion that this film should have been longer, but it was really great. I can't wait to see more from Brady Colbert, and I'm sure after all the hype that this film has gotten, many people are going to be ringing up his phone and giving him all the money. I also saw the budget of this film was only $10 million. Like, this just is a perfect example of, I don't understand why other films cost so much money. Like, this was just a great film experience, and it was not that expensive to make. And I feel like this is my shady last comment. My $27 was like worth 1/30th of that whole entire budget. But anyway, regardless, thank you so much to Brady and all the actors of this film. Thank you, Village East, for the wonderful experience, even though I had to pay for it because I'm a regular customer. But if you have made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you. And this was my review of The Brutalist.